So today we are going to work on solving more equations. I know you're pumped up, and this time we're going to work on using multiplication and division to solve equations. So before we get into that, I want to do some reminders here. I want to take 3 times 4/3. Now, again, if you see fractions, we've got to get over fractions. No fear of fractions. All right. If you were with me in the classroom, we would say that every day because we will work with fractions. We can do it. Okay, so I just want to review. If I take 3 times 4/3, I could put 3 over 1. The 3's reduce, and I'm left with 4. All right, let's take 2/7 times 7/2. Do you remember what these are called to each other? Those are reciprocals. Remember when you take a number and switch the numerator and denominator, or informally say you flip it? Those are reciprocals. What happens when you multiply a number by its reciprocal? Well, of course, you get 1 because the 2's reduce, the 7's reduce, and we get 1. So a number times its reciprocal equals 1. And warm-up question number 3, if it's written like this, 6y divided by 6, I would write it, division problems are fractions, fractions are division problems. So if I put 6y over 6, the 6 is reduced to 1. 1 times y is y. Okay, so I did not write out the next part, but remember what you do to one side, you do to the other. And we use opposite operations when solving equations with multiplication and division. So what is the opposite of multiplication? Of course, it is division. What is the opposite of division? Multiplication. And of course, what we do to one side, we do to the other. So if I multiply something on one side, then I multiply the other side. If I divide on one side, then I divide by the other side. All right, everybody ready? Everybody got their big boy, big girl pants on. Here we go. All right, so number 1A, 8x equals negative 736. All right, so 8 and x are multiplying. What is the opposite of multiplication? It is division, all right? Why? What happens here? This is why I went over this. If I take 8 over 8, that is 1. It reduces to 1x. All right, something that I saw people mixed up on are operations with positives and negatives. A negative divided by a positive is a negative. Take care of your sign first. And then if you do your division, you get negative 92. Let's take a look at B. I have 1/5 r equals 6. No fear of fractions. First of all, this isn't a big deal because remember we talked about that if 1 is in the numerator, woo, easy fraction. All right, so I know 1/5 is multiplying by r, but who the heck wants to take 1/5 and divide it by 1/5? Yuck, ugly, ugly, ugly. So if 5 is in the denominator, isn't that like dividing by 5? What's the opposite of dividing by 5? Multiplication. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 5. So you might be sitting there thinking, Mrs. Evans, I thought you said multiplying and dividing are opposites. They are. I know I'm multiplying by 1/5, but who wants to divide with a fraction? If I've got a divided by 5 in the denominator, I can multiply both sides by 5. You can see why that works. That reduces. 1 times r is r. I have 6 times 5 is 30. Okay, next one. Let's take a look at C. What does it mean when it's written as t over 2? That means division. So t over 2 equals negative 5. Well, how do I undo division? I undo division by multiplication. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 2. The 2's reduce and give me a 1. 1 times t is t. Negative times a positive is a negative 10. Check it out. Put it back in like I did here. Negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. Oops, I forgot D. I wasn't going to do that one, but all right, negative 9y equals negative 45. How do I undo multiplication? Remember when they're written next to each other? I divide. Dividing by a negative 9. Why does that work? Those reduce to give me 1y, which is y. Now, watch your signs. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. So that would be negative 45 divided by negative 9 is 5. Check it out. Put it back in. Negative 9 times 5 is negative 45. All right, let's take a look at E. Remember, no fear of fractions. So I have that negative hanging out. So another big idea for today is don't let negatives just hang out outside in equations. All right, so if I've got a fraction without a variable, I could put the negative in either place, either the -5 or -7. I can't put it in both or else it's going to be a negative over a negative. I just moved it with the -5. Now, remember what we went over just a little bit ago. All right, what happens if you multiply a number by its reciprocal? You get 1. Don't we want a 1 outside of here? So, I could, -5/7 is multiplying y. I could divide by -5/7, but who the heck wants to divide with a fraction? I don't. All right, so I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. So if you have a fraction that has a numerator other than 1, to get rid of it, multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, so I'm going to multiply both sides by -7/5. Remember what happens when you multiply a number by its reciprocal. Okay, you get 1. Now, over here, I'm going to multiply by -7/5. Does it really matter where I put the negative sign? No. Now, I made the 35 over 1. Doesn't 5 go into 35 7 times? I have a positive times a negative, so my answer is negative. 7 times 7 is 49. Okay, let's take a look at F. So I have 2/3 S equals 4 1/3. First of all, another reminder, we do not want to work with mixed numbers. That is very confusing in equations. So remember, we want to change it to an improper fraction or a top-heavy fraction. So remember, it's like climbing your steps. On the first step, you multiply. The second step, you add. So 3 times 4 is 12, plus 1 is 13/3. So I rewrote this as 2/3 S equals 13/3. Now, remember, I want to get S by itself. Ho, ho, ho. Here's a fraction. Remember, no fear of fractions. 2/3 is multiplying S. So yes, I could divide by 2/3, but we don't want to divide by fractions. What are we going to do here? Same thing up here. I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. What's the reciprocal of 2/3? It is 3/2. Those reduce. A number times its reciprocal is 1. So now let's go to the other side. The 3's reduce, and I'm with 13/2. 13/2 is reduced, and to clarify, remember when we say reduced, reduced doesn't mean whether it's improper or mixed number. Reduced means it cannot have a common factor taken out. This does not. I will accept any answer, 13/2 or 6.5. Okay, let's take a look at G. Here is another big idea. Yo, G. Let's take a look here. First of all, we got that negative hanging out, but here's a variable. We don't want to just leave the negative hanging out. Put it with the number. So I rewrote this as 0 equals h over -7. Don't leave a negative hanging out. That's going to cause confusion. If you have a variable, put that negative with your number. All right, so now how do I get h by itself? I'm dividing by a -7, so I need to multiply both sides by -7 because the -7's reduced. What is 0 times anything? It is 0. And let's take a look at h. The -15 times x is 0. -15 is multiplying. How do you undo multiplication? You divide. Why do you divide? Because that equals 1. 1 times x is x. What is 0 divided by anything? 0. Okay, last problems. Take a look at I here. So, if you were in class, I would have you work with your math partner on these last questions and then see how you do. But since we're not, we're going to do these together. All right, so same idea here. Are you going to let this negative hang out? No, you're going to put it with the denominator or with the 4. You don't want to put it with your variable. So now I just have x over -4 equals -12. What's the -4 doing to the x? It's multiplying. It's dividing. How do you undo division? By multiplying. What I do to one side, I do to the other. The -4's reduce. A negative times a negative is a positive, and it's a positive 48. Okay, let's check it. Put it back in. 48 over 4 is 12, and there's a negative hanging out. Yep, that's a true statement. All right, let's take a look at J. Again, if you were with your partner, or if you were at school, I'd have you work with your partner, as this would just be a double check to make sure you understood it. All right, what is the 8 doing to the x? It is dividing. How do we undo division? By multiplication. So we're going to multiply both sides by 8, and we get 56. Do a quick check. Is 56 divided by 8, 7? Sure is. All right, K, the last one here. I added these examples at the bottom of the notes. All right, what's going on here? We got a negative hanging out. Don't let that negative hang out. Put it with your denominator. So I have negative 9 equals b over negative 4. All right, so how do I undo division? Multiplication. So I multiply both sides by negative 4. This is in the numerator, denominator, they reduce. A negative times a negative is a positive. Do a quick check. 36 over 4 is 9, a negative's hanging out. Okay, so in summary, opposite of multiplication is division, opposite of division is multiplication. We use that for solving equations. All right, if you have a fraction, you multiply by the reciprocal because you get 1. If you have a negative just hanging out, put it with the number and not with the variable. All right.